Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be setting up my journal for the month of November, and as always I'm starting with a little flip through of my last month. I really love this theme. I thought it was really fitting for October, and I'm also super excited for this month as well. I chose a sort of dark academia theme with moths as a main motive, and for the colors I chose some more muted tones this time, so I went for this light brown as well as a light yellow, and then this dark purple, which adds a really nice contrast to the other colors. And then I'm also going to be using my gold gel pen for some details, and then for the outlines I chose my Pigma Micron Fineliner, and then also my palette juice pen for any of the smaller titles, and then for the larger ones I went for these stamps by StationeryPal. Starting off on the first page, I'm adding my usual calendar, and I first used the light yellow as a background for the weekdays, and then I wrote them on top with the dark purple. Each day is 2 spaces wide, and then I also wrote the dates underneath with the Pilot Juice pen, and I left 1 space empty in between each week to add a bit more white space. Then I used the gold gel pen to cross out the days from October and December, and the dark purple to add some lines in between the weeks to finish off the calendar. For my cover page, like I mentioned, I wanted to have a moth as the sort of main focus of this theme, so I started by drawing it into the middle of the page, and I made it pretty big because I wanted to have a bit more detail, and I used some pictures from Pinterest as inspiration, but mostly just for the overall shape, and I kind of just made up the pattern so it's not any specific moth. For the outlines I used my Pigma Micron Fineliner, but you could also use any other one as long as it's waterproof so that the markers don't smudge when you color it in later on. I wanted to go for a bit of a thicker outline to make the lines stand out a bit more, since the purple is quite dark and otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to see them very well. I first started by making the body and the wings of the moth, and I tried to make them as symmetrical as I could, but they're definitely not perfect, which I think is totally fine. And then I added some outlines for the patterns, so mainly these long teardrop shapes along the wings, and also some more smaller details, so basically another teardrop shape on the inside, and also a few of those circles, which are supposed to look like eyes to ward off predators in nature. I also added this kind of wavy line on the bottom of the wing just for a bit more detail, and also because I wanted to alternate between the brown and the purple, and this way the shapes look more defined. As you can see, I did mess up the top of the right wing a little bit, but I fixed it later on with the dark purple, so it's not very noticeable. Then I repeated the same pattern for the bottom wings, and again I tried to make the shapes symmetrical, but of course it doesn't have to be perfect. Coming up with the pattern was actually really fun, so you can always just try to make your own and experiment a little bit. Now for the coloring, I started with the brown marker for the body of the moth, so I first colored in the head and the antenna and also the sort of fluffy part of the body. Then I used the dark purple for the top part of the wings, which, like I mentioned, helped to conceal the part on the top right a little bit, and I tried to stay within the lines and also just color in mainly in one direction so that they don't look super streaky. Next, I also colored in the inner part of the teardrop shapes with the dark purple because I tried to alternate between the two colors, and since the body is already brown, I wanted to make the inner part of the wings purple to add more contrast. I repeated those same steps for the other side and then also for the bottom of the wings, and since I wanted to color in the outer teardrop shape with the brown, I decided to also add the purple again right next to it for the wavy part, and I really love the way it turned out because it gives it a sort of border around the wings, which makes the pattern really stand out. I also colored in the dots with the purple, and again I repeated those same steps for the bottom 2 wings. Then I just kept on alternating between the 2 colors, so I left the outer wavy part empty for now, and then added some more purple to the 2 tails on the bottom. Then I just filled in the rest of the pattern with the brown marker, and since the purple is so dark, it's also not very noticeable if I went over the lines a little bit, which made things a lot easier and quicker. I wasn't super sure about the brown at first, but in the end I really loved this color combination, and I think it also fit that dark academia vibe I was going for, which I thought was perfect for November as well. I I wanted to add a little bit of a magical slash witchy touch to the spread, so on the top I went in with the gold gel pen to add the phases of the moon along this arched line, which I thought turned out super pretty, and the gold really adds a lot to the setup in my opinion. I used to use gold a lot more in my setups, but I haven't done it in quite some time, so I was really excited to use it again. I tried to make the moons as even as possible, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect, and you can always just correct it a bit with a white gel pen or an acrylic pen, which is what I did as well. Now, unfortunately, I forgot to press record here, but I also wanted to add some leaf doodles underneath the moth to fill out the empty spaces on the sides, but I just repeated the same leaf on the other side, and I just made sure that there are the same amount of leaves on both sides so that they look more symmetrical, and I also added some dots here and there and 2 small flowers with the dark purple to balance out the design on the bottom. For the title, I first used the light yellow as a background because I wanted to use the stamps on top, and then I just tried to place the stamps evenly, and I did accidentally use the end stamp upside down, so I just fixed up the service a little bit, and then to tie it in with the rest, I also added a simple border around the title with the gold gel pen. Lastly, I wanted to make another border all around the page, so first I used the light yellow to fill in the border, and I kept it pretty simple, so just a rectangle on the outside, and then I added these rounded off corners on the inside so that it makes a little pattern which kind of reminded me of a book cover or something, and I just thought it turned out really pretty. Then to finish off the page, I used the gold gel pen again to basically outline the yellow border I had placed down so that the pattern really stands out. Now with gel pens you have to be a little bit careful not to smudge them since they do take a little bit to dry fully, so I made sure to go from the right to left and then also from top to bottom so that I wouldn't place my ruler on top of the fresh ink. For the rounded corners I just went in and did them freehanded, but sometimes when I'm filming it can be a bit harder to make them even just because I can't really turn the journal whichever way I need, so for some of them they turned out a bit wonky, but I just fixed them with a white acrylograph again. And that is it for these first 2 pages, so let's move on to my habit trackers. For the title I wanted to add the same sort of border but in small, so I first colored in the background with the light yellow again and then used the stamps on top to write habits. Then I added a gold border on the outside and then I just freehanded the rounded corners again on the inside so that it matches the style on the cover page. To decorate the sides, I used the dark purple to draw 2 stems with some leaves because I wanted to keep everything pretty simple, and again I tried to make them symmetrical, and then I also added some dots next to them to fill out the space a bit more. Then for my habits I went for the same layout again that I've been using for the last couple of months, which is basically a calendar where I can color code my habits, and so I don't have to make individual trackers, and I just have everything in one space, which you can also see in my flip through at the beginning of the video. I first colored in the background for the dates, and I used the dark purple for the days from October and December, and then I alternated between the brown and the light yellow for the other days, and then I also used the purple to make the borders all around, and next I wrote the dates with my Pilot Juice pen. Each day is 3 spaces wide and 3 spaces tall so that it fills out the page nicely, and I have enough space to track my 4 habits, but you could even track 6 if you wanted to. Then I crossed out the empty days with my gold gel pen, and I also wrote the weeks on the side because there's a bit more space. Underneath I'm adding my habits, so I assigned each habit one of the colors, and then I can draw a circle in each day with the according color if I completed that habit. This month I'm tracking not using social media in the morning, doing some sort of movement, practicing my art skills, and not using my phone before bed. On the bottom I'm also adding my weekly habits, so I first wrote them down with my dark purple on the left side of the page, and this month I'm tracking making my weekly spreads, having a self-care day, doing my weekly reset, and working out 1 to 2 times per week. And then here I'm making 5 circles for each week underneath the habits to track them, so whenever I complete them I can fill them in or cross them out if I don't. I also used the brown just to fill in the empty space next to the circles, and then I wanted to draw another moth design on the right to make the page look a bit more interesting. I started by just making the outlines again, just like on the cover page, but on a much smaller scale, so I simplified some of the shapes just so that they're still readable. I kept the pattern pretty much the same, but I left out those circular spots just because they would have been a bit too small, and also the wavy pattern on the outer part of the wings because again there was not that much space and I didn't want to make it look too crowded. Then I colored in the moth with the same approach as for the cover page. So first I colored in the body and head with the brown as well as the top line of the upper wings. And then I went in with the purple to color in some of the parts of the pattern. So again, that inner portion of the teardrop shapes and also the very outer portion of the wings, so that there is a nice contrast between the two colors. I really enjoyed these doodles because they felt a bit like filling out a page from a coloring book because the lines were pretty thick, so it was a really satisfying process. Then I just filled in the rest again with the brown shade, and then I also added the moon phases on the top again, as well as a leaf doodle on the bottom to tie it in with the cover page design. I think it turned out super pretty, and it really made the whole spread feel a lot more cohesive, just because I wasn't really sure how to incorporate the moth in the other pages apart from the cover page, but I think this ended up being just the right balance. Now for the other page I went for the same style of title, but as you can see I messed it up a little bit on my first attempt because I smudged one of the letters, so I just cut out a piece of paper from an old journal that was the same size as the title, and I just covered it up, which works great because I could just conceal the edges of the paper with the gold border, so you can't even really tell it's there in the end. Then I just redid the title and I wrote November because this page will be dedicated to just some general planning sections I like to include every month. And then I also added the purple leaves on the sides and the small gold dots. And then I made 6 sections in total on the bottom, so 4 sections for each of the weeks, and then 2 more for November and December, where I usually like to write down bigger events or birthdays. I colored in the background for the titles first, and I alternated between the brown and the light yellow just to add some variety. And then I used the purple for all of the borders, so all of the sections are 10 spaces wide with 2 spaces empty in between them horizontally, and then the weekly sections are 10 spaces tall and the other 2 are only 8 spaces tall, and then I left 1 space empty underneath the titles as well as in between the sections vertically. As always, this depends a little bit on how many grid spaces your journal has, so for reference mine has 38 spaces vertically and 26 spaces horizontally. Then I wrote the titles in black, and here I'm also adding some gold leaf doodles in the lower right corner of each section just to finish off the page. And that's it for these two, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of November. Now, in case you're new to bullet journaling and are looking for some inspiration, I've recently come across this really cute and quick class about making new and interesting weekly spreads on Skillshare, who is also very kindly sponsoring this part of the video. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. They not only have classes on illustration, organization, hand lettering, and much more, but they also have curated collections of classes to master a specific skill, which are called learning paths. During this back-to-school season, they have improved their class categories and have also added new class topics such as creative careers and creative inspiration. Once you join Skillshare, you can select your interests, and from there you will get specific recommendations tailored to your goals. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so get started today, and thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this part of the video. So for this weekly spread, I wanted to keep things super simple and just include the sort of border design and then some small doodles because I like to just keep my weekly spreads really quick and efficient. I started by splitting the page into 8 equal sections, and then I'm coloring in the border with the light yellow again for the first section on the top left. Then I used the gold gel pen to outline the border just like on the cover page, and as for the sizing, each section is 10 spaces wide and 16 spaces tall, and I left 2 spaces empty in between the sections both horizontally and vertically. I wanted to add a mini calendar into the middle of the first section, so I used the brown to color in the background for the weekdays, and I left some space on the top and bottom so that it's nice and centered. Then I just wrote the weekdays and the dates in black, and I did have to write them where the dots are instead of in the spaces between the dots, so that the mini calendar is also centered horizontally, if that makes sense. Then I crossed out the empty days with the dark purple, and then I added some more moons on the top, although there was only enough space for 3 this time, but I still think it turned out really pretty. And lastly, I also made some more leaf doodles with the purple on the bottom to fill out the section. Next, for my daily sections, I first colored in a circle on the top for the title, and I alternated between the light yellow and the brown shade. I made the circles across 2x2 spaces so that they are big enough for the stems, and then I just added the first letter of each day into those circles. Then I decorated the sides with some gold leaf doodles, and I always started by drawing the stems so that they're nice and centered, and then I added 3 small leaves, one on the end and then 2 more on the sides, which makes them look a lot more even since they look pretty much symmetrical, which was a big part of this whole theme. Now, if you're looking for some more inspiration for your weekly spreads, I do post them in the community tab of my channel, so definitely be sure to check those out if you're interested. Next, I'm making the borders with the dark purple again to balance out the color palette, and I left one space empty underneath the title so they're not too crowded, so the boxes end up being 13 spaces tall in total. Lastly, I wrote down the dates in gold again on the very bottom of each section, and I decided not to add any more details just because I wanted to keep it pretty simple overall. So that is it for this setup, and let's do a little flip through. Now, usually I really struggle with coming up with themes for these sort of winter months at the end of the year, but this time I sort of already knew what I wanted it to look like, so this was actually a really fun design to make, and I think the moths turned out really pretty, together with the sort of magical touches with the moons and the sparkles, and I also just really love how the gold shimmers in the light. I think it really added a lot to this theme, so I hope you like it as well, and let me know which page was your favorite. I think mine definitely has to be the cover page. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!